All right, everyone. So now that we've learned about weathering and physical weathering versus chemical weathering, we're going to move on a little bit and talk about some other factors that can control weathering, speed weathering up or slow it down. And first off, let's talk about climate. Now around here in this area of New York State, in fact the whole Northeast for that matter, we have cold winters, we have warm summers, and we have plenty of moisture. This allows for lots of this alternate freeze-thaw, the cycle that we have, especially in the springtime, which makes all those potholes in our roads. That's a pretty extreme form of physical weathering. Now, if you live in a place like Florida, for instance, where it's warm and moist a lot of the year, they have an extreme chemical type weathering. For instance, all those sinkholes that form down there. We don't have to worry about those quite as much here. But that's, of course, all the rainwater dissolving limestone bedrock. And as it dissolves away, there's nothing left underneath to support structures like homes. In both cases, though, in both extreme physical and chemical weathering, water is the primary ingredient that promotes weathering. Whether it's the physical expansion of water due to freezing and then, contraction when it thaws out, or whether it's water acting chemically on soil and on bedrock. In either case, water is involved. All right, what kind of climate supports weathering? And here's a nice graph we have. Temperature on the x-axis, temperature here. And on our y-axis, we have mean annual precipitation. And you can see from this graph that there's all different kinds of weathering that can happen depending on different factors of different combinations of annual temperature and annual precipitation. And so we're going to use this graph on part of our homework assignments. One thing that you really should know, besides reading the graph itself, is above that dashed line is the approximate limit of possible temperature and precipitation conditions on Earth. Earth doesn't have conditions where there's that much precipitation or that cold or warm of a temperature. And so anything above that line is theoretically impossible on Earth. Not necessarily impossible, but theoretically impossible. All right, moving on. What weathering type dominates each number? So you'd have to be able to look up these locations perhaps on the internet or in a textbook, maybe your social studies book, find out what kind of climates these places have, and then with that information be able to determine whether it's a chemical weathering or a physical weathering dominant climate. Now, I pulled this off the internet a while back. This was from a college professor teaching about different types of weathering depending on different climates. We have tropical rainforests, deserts, subpolar, polar, and then very intense versus just intense or moderate physical weathering or chemical weathering. So you can break this stuff up as detailed as you really want to, but we're not going to get into that in this course quite as much. Okay, differential weathering due to climate and composition. Here we have a picture of some rock. It's a waterfall and a stream flowing over it. And masses of rock do not weather uniformly. That means not evenly, due to all kinds of factors, like perhaps what the rock is made out of. This results in unusual and spectacular rock formations. Around here we have these really cool looking potholes in the rock and stream beds, and that's just the swirling action, moving rocks around and around and around, boring a hole into the bedrock of the stream. But we also have a lot of weak shale, and streams just blast right through the shale like nothing. It's not a very strong rock. All right, which layer in this is most resistant in this diagram? We also use the word competent to mean the most resistant to weathering. And the most resistant would be the one that is the least weathered or least worn down. So rocks like A, C, and D would be a more resistant bedrock than rock B, which is the least competent. It's worn down the most. And you might see that same picture turned on the side. They might show you a picture of a cliff, and it'd still be the same answers. You'll also be asked to identify which diagrams or which pictures, which photos show a place that's being weathered in an arid climate, that's a dry climate, or humid, a moist climate like we have here. And you typically look for really rounded slopes in humid climates. Water rounds things off. So this choice here, letter B, would be the humid climate, whereas letter A would be an arid climate, perhaps a desert, like a canyon in the desert. This picture here contrasts both side by side. So you would never see anything like this in real life where you had humid type topography right next to an arid type topography. They'd be separated by quite a distance. But you get the idea. Lots of vegetation on the left, lots of curved hills, rounded bedrock. You can see the rounding right here by all the moisture. And on the other side, similar rock composition, as you can see over here. All these rocks are same on both sides. Sandstones and some shales and more sandstones. However, because there's a lot less moisture to weather the rocks in this picture on the right, you get these steep angular cliffs and then maybe some sloping sections of bedrock and then more cliffs. You can see how they match up like that. And that is it. Quick lesson on climate and weathering.